Okay, so again, we're gonna go ahead and have an exam on Monday, uh, on chapter 1 through chapter 6. I don't know how many questions are gonna be. It can go from 30 questions all the way to 50 questions. Uh, and I do require that you guys have your cameras on for the test. I know it's kind of uncomfortable, and I don't want to be seeing the ceiling or the forehead. I need a full exam. I mean, a full facial and everything from you guys. Um, so let me go ahead and get started with this. We're probably gonna cover a couple of chapters today, which will probably be chapter 6 and chapter 7. Chapter 6 is the first one. Do this. And this chapter deals with how you're gonna move patients around. Are you gonna, correctly move them around with actually not causing any more injury? You guys are there, right? I mean, I just see your names, but I don't see any reaction from you guys.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh,
Yes,
okay,
sir,
good.
we're here.
Okay, just wanted to make sure because I mean, a lot of times I've talked to myself. Uh, don't even know you're not there. I know that there was one kid at one time, and it was during the summer that he had his camera on all the time, so I would see him when he would get up. Then I noticed that it's like 20 minutes, and it took him forever. So when he came back, I asked him, say, "Hey, where were you at?" I went to the restroom. Say, "Did you have diarrhea?" So I mean, it was like one of those where people get up and go to the restroom, which is fine. And if you go to the restroom, please do not take your computer with you. I really don't want to hear or see anything. So anyway, this is the principles of lifting, moving, and positioning patients. This is one of the skills that we do need to practice at the very end. And it's only important because there's specific ways of doing this type of moving the patient without actually causing any more harm. So principles of moving patients safely. Body mechanics. A proper and efficient use of your body is to facilitate lifting and moving. You basically need to make a plan. Once you get there, uh, you need to know which will be the best way to actually move the patient out of the car or move the patient somewhere else. Estimate the weight of the patient. Consider physical limitations that you have. In other words, if you can't lift more than 20 pounds, you're not going to lift an adult. So, and communicate with your partner also. Now, I'm going to tell you an example. And this happened when I was a student, an EMT student. I had what they did back in the day. They actually had real crash cars, and what we were doing, uh, they had already removed because we were also working with the fire department, so they had removed the roof already. So it was our turn to go in there and actually get the patient out. And I remember this patient was lying on the back seat, lying all the way across. If you see the seat from the top, she was lying all the way across, almost like in a fetal position. I know this is not gonna sell anywhere, so she was smiling. Of course, she was screaming because she had to pretend she was hurt. The only thing is that she was very close to the edge right here, very close. So when I walked in there, I said, well, it's going to be an easy move. But every time I touched her, she would scream like loud to where I got like the hairs in my back of my neck started standing up. So I got to the point that I was, I took a moment and I started thinking, well, which would be the best way to remove her from the car? Remember, we work with what they call the platinum 10 minutes. Okay, this is the amount of time we're going to spend in the field with the patient. So if before we transport, so if this patient was already there okay, stuck in there, and they were removing the roof. That takes time. So, it was one of those where, something, let's start counting it from right here when I got to the patient. So every time I tried to move her, she just would scream. So I would try to straighten her out, and she would scream. Okay. So I had a backboard that was like right there. I was thinking maybe we could just like roll her over and put her on there and not put the backboard on this other side. You start developing a plan. Uh, and it got to the point that nothing, everything I would do, she would scream in pain. So, and then I remembered that one of the things that we talked about when we're dealing with trauma emergencies or medical emergencies, if they have severe pain, they need to be at the hospital already. Okay. So I just like grabbed her and like pushed her and rolled her over to the stretcher. Of course, my instructor saw that. And when I was actually carrying her out, he just tells me, kind of rough, wasn't it? Okay. And I just looked at him, smiled, and said, yep. But I need to take her to the hospital. And I just told her, I just told my instructor it wasn't her, it was him. Michael Broadwater. I told him, I'm sorry, she's in severe pain. She needs to be at the hospital. So he just took that as like, okay, I understand. Sometimes you do stuff that people don't agree with. But it was, according to him, it was the right move. So basically, you have to make a plan and then consider your limitations and kind of estimate what the patient is going to weigh and what the height is, and communicate with your partner, because your partner is going to be the other person is going to be helping you. And the communication between you and your partner is very important, especially when you're dealing with moving patients and moving them around. Okay. Proper and efficient use of your body to facilitate lifting and moving patients. Position your feet properly. Now, ideally, and I encountered this the first time I ever gave a class in Rio Grande. And this is when I was working with a community college. There was this girl, and she was standing next to the stretcher, and her feet were very close together. Okay, very close together. And ideally, we want to separate our feet a little bit farther away so we can have better balance when we're lifting up a patient or moving a patient. So I was standing there not knowing, it was this older lady already. And one of my lab assistants turned around and told her, hey, you need to put your feet together, which is, it's a correct thing to tell him, right? And she goes, why? And this guy just is standing here. This guy's a bigger guy, right? Ex-military, is standing there and just shoves her that way. And the stretcher fell to the side. And then he turns around and tells her, that is why. So you need to separate your legs a little bit so you can get a better stance. Then I learned that again in Taekwondo when I was taking Taekwondo classes, where you kick with your hands and punch with your feet. So keeping your legs slightly apart is a good thing. Gives you better balance. Not only that, you lift with your legs, you don't lift with your back. And I'm going to show you heard that one before all over the place. And then when lifting an object with one hand, avoid leaning over either side. In other words, do not go lift up a patient while you're actually bent sideways. And that's because the vertebrae are like this. And when you lean over, you open up that space over here. And what happens, you might actually get a bulging out of one of your discs. So you don't want to do that. I like that one. Okay. Proper and efficient use of your body to facilitate lifting and moving patients. Minimize twisting during lifting. keep weight as close as possible, um, and use a stair chair. Excuse me, stair chair when possible. And the only times you're going to use it is when you're in the second floor, third floor, whatever you need to take somebody down the stairs. Hence the name stair chair, right? Have you all ever seen these stair chairs before? They should have them in almost every building that has more than one floor. And they're usually right next to the AED or the fire extinguisher. And a lot of people just don't know how to use them, but they're easy to use. If I can use them, you guys can. Now I'm also, hold on, let me see, minimize it. A few years ago, I broke my arm. I got in a fight with a tree and the tree won. Okay. So I broke my arm and I had a device called an ORIF, open reduction internal fixation, which is basically a little metal plate that was put right around here. Some part Wolverine, if you think about it. Now, if you don't know what a Wolverine is, go to the movies, okay? So it's a little piece of thing, but I had to go to rehab afterwards. I was forced to go to rehab. And it was fun because, I mean, the guys were always having fun there. But I remember one of the exercises that they did is they had a bar that you had to grasp on with both hands, okay? And that bar had a 10-pound weight hanging onto it. So we were supposed to do this to lift it up and do that at least 10 times. And then you will let go slowly again and then go back this other way. So you can have some movement back to the wrist, right? So the thing is that in itself is not a hard exercise. But when they tell you stretch out your arms like this all the way, the farthest you can put them, and do that, then the weight actually increases. That 10 pounds seem to have been 50 pounds. So always keep the weight as close as possible to the body so you don't increase the weight. I mean, it doesn't really physically increase it. It just gives you the sensation that it increases. So if you notice, she's actually bending her legs, keeping her straight back right here, and getting as close as possible to the patient to lift up the patient. So she's not going to lift up with her back, she's going to lift up with her legs. Now, another thing, I'm going to tell you a secret, guys. Which is the heaviest part of the body? The upper torso or the lower torso or the lower body? To see if anybody has common sense. I can't teach you common sense. You have to learn it yourself.
It should be the upper torso, right?
Yep. The upper torso is the heaviest part. So normally, if somebody jumps into the upper torso, they don't know that that's going to be heavy. So be very careful when you decide to lift up a patient. Make sure that the right person lifts up the patient. I remember I was working with this individual that worked in Stark County EMS, and we used to have what we call the two-man stretcher. And the two-man stretcher was not as friendly as the stretchers that we have right now. The two-man stretcher, you had to go all the way to the bottom with the wheels, all the way to the first position, and then lock it, and then lift up everything, including the wheels, to put the patient in. That was called a backbreaker. What do you call that? Stretcher. So I remember when we did that, I lifted up the torso, and my partner, the other individual, lifted up the legs, and we couldn't even get like 12 inches above without all our body shaking. Of course, the patient was like a 250-pound patient. So we had to actually have help from the fire department to help us out. But it happens. And notice she actually keeps her back straight, but is lifting with her legs. So it'll be ideal that you guys, start doing exercises to actually strengthen your legs. Now, I'm going to tell you one thing. I did meet a kid because I was trying to, when I was in high school, teaching a high school EMT class, I was trying to get these guys to exercise, and a lot of the girls were in volleyball, so they did pretty good at lifting up. And there was a couple of guys that were in soccer, and one of them didn't know how to squat, which is I thought it was kind of weird. I think anybody, like would know how to squat, but this guy didn't know how to squat. I couldn't teach him. I mean, I couldn't. It took me some time to teach him how to squat, so he can use his legs to lift up the patient. You guys know what a squat is, right? Where you bend down all the way down to this position and then lift up with your legs.
Yes, sir.
Well, apparently you're the only one.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now you wake up. Now
Yes,
we're
sir.
now that we're making fun of you. So then basically, and then you straighten out as much as possible. And keep your legs, straighten out your legs once you lift, but always keep your back straight and never twist. Now, do you know that, and this rule still exists under the Department of State Health Services, which is our governing licensing agency, that we have to lift up 75 pounds on a stretcher in order to pass the skill. Nobody does it anymore because nowadays you have stretchers that are electronic, pneumatic, where you just press a button and it lifts up by itself. But when you get tested for your skills, they should test you to see if you can lift up 75 pounds on a stretcher on a fulcrum. So in other words, the back wheels are inside the unit already, and you can lift up the patient, which is a rule that still exists. Now, what you see here, okay, this is a stair chair. These stair chairs have a little guided rail at the bottom that will actually facilitate you moving the patient up and down. Now, ideally, you always want to have the patient facing the way you're moving them, because if not, they're going to be getting dizzy. The other thing is that you have to have a person, and it's not like he's not trying to tell him, hey, you're doing a good job by patting him on his back. What he's doing, he's actually letting him know, I'm here, you have another step, now you're cleared. So you have to have a guide whenever you're moving backwards, because if not, if you fall down, yes, the whole shebang falls on top of you. Only move a patient when absolutely necessary. Dangerous environment, when you move a patient when there's a dangerous environment. If there's a fire, if there's gas spillage, my Mexican just came out, I'm sorry, spillage, not spillage. When there's a fire, or danger of the car turning over or something like that, you remove the patient. You cannot adequately assess airway, breathing, and circulation or bleeding. In other words, part of our primary survey when we're dealing with patient assessment, which we still haven't gone over with, but part of it is that we need to check the airway, the breathing, and circulation. And if you can't do it because the patient is in, what do you call it, facing down or sideways, then you can move the patient to actually assess that. Or unable to actually gain access to other patients who need life-saving care. Okay. Little protection for patient injuries, and moving may actually cause some pain on a patient. Like that girl was, when I was trying to move her from the back part of the car onto the stretcher. Now, things to think about is that why is it important to use proper lifting and moving techniques? One thing is that it'll prevent you from getting injured. Okay, and that's important. Remember, your own personal safety is more important than the patient's safety. So it's for your own personal safety. You and your partner respond to a third-story building, find a patient who is unable to ambulate due to extreme abdominal pain. How would you actually safely extricate the patient? And the word extricate is basically remove the patient from the building. Well, we went over that little device called the stair chair, right there. If they can't move, then you put them on a stair chair. It'll make it a lot easier for you to actually move them around. Okay. Emergent moves. Now, these are the moves that you get there. So, oh, I'm gonna go and use this device, and I'm gonna have 50 people helping me. All of a sudden, a fire breaks out, and you need to move the person out very quickly and safely. Okay, an emergent move, also called the emergency move, is when the scene is hazardous, like there's a fire, or there's any type of danger to you or your patient. When the patient requires immediate repositioning, and so you need to move the patient to open up the airway, or do anything else that's life-saving, or when you must reach another patient who requires life-saving care. There's this technique called the drags. Okay, the patient is pulled by their clothes, or if they're lying on their back, you can grab their clothes and just slide them out. Sorry. Feet or shoulders, or by using a blanket. You actually initiate it from shoulders by pulling along the long axis of the body. In other words, you don't want to pull them sideways. You want to pull them, from the head, pull them outwards. Avoid dragging patients sideways. And actually, to move a patient down the stairs or down inclines, grab under shoulders and pull their head, pull head first as you actually walk backwards. You don't pull their head, you pull head first while you're walking backwards. And this is what they call a drag. So you grab them by their clothes and you pull them out as fast as possible. This is another form. Notice how they're actually using the clothes to actually drag them out. This is another one. They're grabbing by the shoulders instead of the clothes, and they're pulling them out. Y'all can see the pictures, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Now, this is another one. They actually have these little belt things or straps that you can actually put under the shoulders, put them on top, and you can actually drag them using that technique also. It's also considered a drag. Emergent moves, think about it. What type of situation might actually warrant using emergent moves? Well, whenever there's a danger to the patient. Simple as that. Whenever the scene gets hazardous. What further injury might actually result in the EMRs or yourselves and properly move the patient? Well, if they have a C-spine injury where you suspect cervical spine, you might paralyze them. Another one might actually be when you have if there's an injury, you might actually exacerbate it. And by exacerbate means that you make it worse. Standard moves. Standard moves. Okay. The preferred choice when a situation is not urgent, patient is stable, and have time to actually time and personnel for the move itself, or use help of other trained personnel or bystanders. Okay. Appropriate reasons for standard move. The patient is in discomfort. Okay. Indicated care requires moving the patient. Given closer to a source of water, or getting closer to a source of water, or the patient insists on being moved. And these moves are more controlled as opposed to the quick moves that we just went over. Okay. Before moving the patient, complete the primary assessment, choose the number of rescuers, avoid compromising the neck and spinal injuries, and consider splinting suspected fractures before you do this, okay? So when we're talking about patient assessment, which is something that we're gonna have to learn, and it's gonna be something that it's not that we don't have a choice. We don't have a choice. It's one of our standalone diagnostic tools is to do the patient assessment. The first part of the patient assessment. Okay. God, I already messed this up. Patient assessment, the first part is the primary survey. Get the primary survey, then we follow it by your head to toe exam. And eventually you follow it up with reassessment. Okay, so the primary survey here, okay, basically all it is you check your airway, breathing, and circulation. Okay, now when we're taking your ABCs, now there's some books that will tell you A, B, C, D, and E, and whatever, but the main thing you have to remember is that you need to make sure that the airway is open. Why do you need to make sure that the airway is open? Think about it. Why do you think to make sure that the airway is open? Well, the airway is closed, then you can't get any oxygen in there, and the person's suffocating. No, you cannot jump into the B section of it until you make sure that airway is open, because the other one is breathing. If their airway is not open, okay, that basically means that the person, no matter what you do, is not going to breathe. So the second part of it would be breathing. And what you do is you, like what they teach you in CPR, I'm sorry. What they teach you in CPR is to give a couple of rescue breaths and find out if air is going in and out. And the third thing you do is you circulate. You check for circulation, I'm sorry. Check for pulse to see if it exists. You don't have to count it. You just need to make sure that there's a pulse. If the airway is not open, you're never going to get to this point. You need to fight to open up that airway. If breathing is not there, then you have to artificially breathe for him. Okay? And if that is open and you actually breathing for him, or he's breathing adequately, then you jump to the circulation point and find out if there's a pulse. Because if there's no pulse, guess what you guys are gonna do?
CPR?
CPR. I remember I had one student. I was checking out some of the skills some of the high school students were doing, and this was back. This was a Westaco high school that did this, and the kid comes in, and they yell, "Hey, you call an ambulance, or call 911. We have a patient that's unconscious." The kid yells out, "I know CP&L." Okay, well, CP&L is an electric company. God, you guys don't have a sense of humor. But I mean, it happened. I mean, I'm not making it up. It's just kind of weird that he yelled out that he knows CP&L. Okay, remember, if you don't splint, if you splint it before any fractures, before you actually put the patient or move the patient, it makes it easier for you to move the patient because if not, you're going to have a dangling body part that is not going to allow you to do anything. Okay. You have 3 rescuers. Okay, direct ground lift. Now this is one of the moves that we practice, direct ground lift. Okay. You have 3 rescuers move the patient from the ground to the bed or stretcher. Patients lying flat, face up, which is also known as supine. Arms are placed on the chest. Lift the patient up from the level of their knees, and roll the patient towards their chest. Stand together and move the patient. Now, how about if the patient is not supine and he's actually prone? He's facing down. His face is on the ground. What would you do?
Wait for instructions?
No.
No, will you move it?
Well, right now, as a student, yes.
Well, yeah, that's why, like, for a student, we have to wait for instructions.
Okay, so at this point, if the patient is prone, then guess what you're gonna do? You're gonna make him be supine. So you have to twist. I mean, you have to switch the patient so he can actually be facing up.
Okay.
But it's a good answer. Good answer. When I said no, is because I normally train paramedics. Like, you should know that already. Damn it. Anyway, before moving the patient, complete the primary assessment. Okay, I went over that one. I'm sorry. I don't know why I just jumped aside. So at this point, what they're doing, the patient is facing up, okay? And I think she had an allergic reaction, same patient. And they're actually lifting the patient, her controlling the not the abdomen, but the pelvic region and the legs. And he's actually lifting up the rest of the body. But now, look at his gaze. Have you ever seen so much love? No? Okay. Okay, so at this point, you bring the patient closer to you so you can lift up the patient. Okay. Now, of course, this is a patient that you don't suspect any type of other injury. And then you put her on the stretcher. Always don't forget to lift up these little things here because it forms a little barrier so they don't actually fall back down. Okay. You have the extremity lift, which requires 2 rescuers, one lifting the patient's arms and the other one lifting the patient's legs. Ideal for moving patients from ground to the chair or the stretcher. Do not perform if head, neck, or spine, shoulder, hip, or knee injury is suspected. Now, the question is, how would we suspect an injury like this? A head, neck, spine, shoulder, hip, or knee injury. How would you suspect it? Well, when we go over patient assessment and we start going over mechanisms of injury, we can guesstimate what the injury was. And it's like the person falls off a building and lands on their head, then you know they're gonna have head trauma, right? Duh. If they land on their feet, then you have to suspect they're gonna have leg trauma plus lower back trauma. So yeah. Extremity lift, patients should be supine again with knees flexed. Kneel at the head of the patient, placing their hands under the shoulder, and have helpers stand at patient's feet and grasp his or her wrists. Okay. So at this point, he's actually grabbing onto the wrist and trying to lift up the patient. Okay. Extremity lift, slip your arms under the patient's armpits and grasp the wrists and pull the patient into sitting position. Okay, now she's actually grabbing the wrist while putting her arms under her underarm. So you can actually lift up the patient easier. Okay, extremity lift, slip your arms under the patient's armpits and grasp the wrists and pull the patient into sitting position. Okay, now she's actually grabbing the wrist while putting her arms under her underarm. So you can actually lift up the patient easier. So you can actually lift up the patient easier. Okay, extremity lift, slip your arms under the patient's armpits and grasp the wrists and pull the patient into sitting position. Okay, now she's actually grabbing the wrist while putting her arms under her underarm. So you can actually lift up the patient easier. Both stand at the same time. Move as unit when carrying the patient, and avoid swinging the patient. Okay, so at this point, they lifted up the patient. One's holding onto the legs, and the other one's holding on to the torso. Now, let me ask you a question. Should these guys be switched because the torso is the heaviest part?
That was what I thinking, like, shouldn't be backwards, like the guy carrying the heavy part.
Yeah, it could be, but I mean, think about it. How much do you think she weighs? I'm thinking maybe 100 pounds, 110 pounds.
115, yeah, 115, 110, more or less.
So it might not, she might actually be stronger than he is. If you look at her, she has a very calm demeanor, and he's already tired.
Or maybe he's the new guy and he's teaching him.
Not true. True. But you never know. Okay, direct. Now they have the direct carry method. Move the patient with no suspected spine injury from bed or from the bed level position to stretcher, and position the stretcher perpendicular to the bed with head end of stretcher at the foot level itself of the bed. So as you're going to put the stretcher right here, you're going to move the patient this way. Okay, and basically all it is that this is the bed, and you basically are going to be moving the patient. This is kind of an ugly drawing. But basically all it is that you just put the stretcher right next to the bed and transfer the patient to the stretcher, like this. Now what they're doing is also like a direct carry. But what I would do instead, I would lower this stretcher to the level of the bed, so you can just grab the bed sheets and drag them on, so that way you don't get injured. But they want to do a direct carry. You put them on the stretcher itself. Yeah. Draw sheet method, which is the one I just told you about. From one side of the bed, loosen the bottom sheet under the patient, position the stretcher next to bed, and adjust the height of the stretcher to actually match the level of the bed. Lower the rails and unbuckle the straps. Then basically you do grasp the sheet firmly with your at patient's head, chest, and hips and knees. Draw the patient onto the stretcher, sliding one smooth motion, and can also use slider boards and actually slide bags. Now in the hospital, sometimes they do have what we call slider boards to make it easier. But basically what you do is you put the stretcher right next to the bed. Like on this one, if you're going to be transporting from the stretcher to the bed, you grab the sheet and you lift it up and slide it over. Now what you see here, this little thing right here, the white thing, that in itself is a slider board. It makes it easier for the person to slide off into the stretcher. Into the bed. You have another picture of the slider board right here. This one's kind of like a slider board, but I'm gonna put it this way. It's just more like a drag sheet. Okay. What are the key, something to think about? What are the key components of a safe lift? Same thing we went over a little while ago. You need to make sure that the patient, that you keep your legs bend when you're lifting, and get the patient as close as possible to you, and lift with your legs, not with your back. You respond to a home of a morbidly obese patient in no apparent distress. What sources do you have if you find you are unable to remove the patient using a standard resource? What sources do you think you might be able to use, guys?
Call for more help.
Yeah, but who do you think might help you?
Well, I used to be a 911 dispatcher, so they always call for the fire department for a lift assist.
There you go. A fire department. They're really good at helping you lift. And of course, I heard that there's a couple of companies that are getting tired of lifting, assisting when that can actually be fighting fires. But then again, part of the job. So, and you want to get fire department people because they're actually certified in EMR, as opposed to just getting somebody that's just standing there and they're not certified to do anything because they know how to lift them up correctly. Okay. Equipment for transporting patients. We have wheeled stretchers, also known as gurneys, cots, or prams. Okay. Used to actually transport the patient from scene of an emergency to the ambulance and from the ambulance to the hospital bed. Okay, it locks into the ambulance and the foot and head may actually elevate to give you that Trendelenburg's position and to give you that shock position. And which is the other one? Excuse me, Trendelenburg's, and then the other one would be the what? Which one? Fowler's position. Okay. Yeah. Types of wheeled stretchers. You have a single operator. You have an undercarriage collapse. Dual operator, which is the second, provide lifts under the carriage. Let me close the door, guys. And electric pneumatic lift, which is electric mechanisms lifts the undercarriage. I've seen a lot of companies actually getting the electric ones and the pneumatic ones. They're pretty cool. So we'll get you to see here. This is mainly an H-frame stretcher. H because it looks like a letter H right there. And what happens is that once you get these little wheels, which is the leading wheels, into the ambulance back, you can actually lift up, press a release lever here on his hands and push it in, and these wheels actually roll up. And when you take it out, same thing, you press the release button and actually lower themselves down. Make sure you hear the click before you actually take out the patient. And it's a click that locks the mechanism. Okay. This is an X-frame. Guess why it's called X-frame? Because it resembles.
Because it looks like an X.
Yeah, it looks like an X. I have like 3 of these at the office. And basically, you need 2 people for this one. A person will actually have to grab onto a little handle right here. And once the little leading wheels that you see here are inside the stretcher, okay, I mean inside the ambulance, he or she can lift up while the person's actually pushing it. This is one of the electronic ones. This is not a pneumatic one, this is an electronic one. And there's a button here that will actually lift these legs or both legs. Or from the floor, it can actually be lifted up all the way to the top. They're heavier because of the mechanisms that they have, but they work awesome. Okay. Additional equipment for moving patients, the scoop stretchers. Now, the scoop stretcher itself it does what it says. It scoops up the patient. And these scoop stretchers can be divided into 2 sections from side to side. And what happens is that you get those 2 sections and put them under the patient and lock it, and then now you can lift up the patient. And they're usually there because of hip or pelvic injuries. The other one, believe it or not, is when they're broken all over the place. It's a lot easier to scoop them than to do anything else. You have the portable stretcher also, which is lightweight and easier to carry downstairs. And this portable stretcher is like, have you all ever seen like a soccer game? When somebody gets hurt in the field and they're made out of like some type of cloth, and they pick up the patient and they just move the patient out of the football field. Well, that's what the portable stretcher looks like. Then, of course, you have your flexible, which is restricted or narrow areas. Now, I'm going to tell you, most of these stretchers, you can actually get, there's a lever right here that you can press, and it'll bring this down, making it shorter while you lift this section up. So now you make the stretcher a lot smaller, and it can actually go around corners, like getting into elevators or whatsoever. This does the same thing. If you notice that if you actually press a lever here, right here, this section here collapses down, making it a lot shorter. Which I thought it was kind of weird is that they actually have captain's arms right here for the patient. Kind of weird. So anyway, then we have the portable stretcher, and then we have the flexible stretcher, which is flexible stretcher. Most of our stretchers are flexible, except for the scoop stretcher, which is not flexible, and the portable stretcher. But every other type of stretchers that we have are flexible. We have the basket stretcher. Okay, the basket stretcher is used in the field, and all it is just like a big humongous basket where you can put a patient in and basically tie him down to that stretcher, hook it up to a helicopter or a fire truck, and help you lift them up from an incline. And of course, you have the stair chairs, which are wheelchairs for moving patients downstairs or in tight spaces also. This is a scoop stretcher. If you notice right here, the guy's actually supposed to be taking it apart, but it's not broken apart. And what happens is that you remove from right here and right here, separate these two areas, and basically now you can actually put it under the patient, and eventually you just clip it on, and it becomes solid. This is the type of stretcher that is kind of like a bendable stretcher, but it's like the one that you get to see where you're actually carrying like a gurney type of thing. Okay, it does bend. No, actually, it doesn't bend. This one doesn't bend. I'm sorry. But what happens is that they're a lot lighter, and you can actually carry it. The only thing is that they don't have wheels. Now, this is the flexible one, where basically, believe it or not, it's rigid like this, but you can make it into this small size. And you can actually transport a patient with one of these. And this is a basket stretcher, where basically now you can put the backboard and the patient in here, and you can tie it off or any of these areas, and you can actually carry the patient without being scared of losing the patient. Okay, this is another form. This is like a combination, but this is also another form of the scoop stretcher. If you notice that there's a separation right here and a separation right here. I prefer the other one better. Okay, spinal precautions equipment. Okay, whenever we suspect a patient of having spinal injury, and we're gonna find out that we suspect these patients having a spinal injury because of the mechanism of injury. Okay, when you suspect a spinal injury, and there's a vest type extrication device, which is also known as the KED, the Kendrick's extrication device, and I'll show it to you. They immobilize the patient and they are seated in the vehicle itself. Makes it a lot easier, faster to move them out. Okay. You have the full body mobilization devices, like vacuum splints that conform to the body itself. And then you have the PD board, which is basically a spine board for children themselves. So this is basically a backboard. Okay. And most backboards are the same. They come in wood or plastic. And basically what you do is you put the patient on top by log rolling them on the stretcher. I mean, not the stretcher, the backboard, and tying them off with these things that are called spider straps. Okay. And you kind of secure the patient to the stretcher. So, I mean, to the backboard. This is the KED device, the Kendrick's extrication device. Mine's red, this one's green. But basically all it is that if you have somebody sitting inside a car trapped in there and you want to make sure that they don't injure their backs or a C-section, which is basically not a C-section, C-collar section, you put this device on them, put them around, and now you have a rigid back, which basically now you can grab it from the sides and pull the patient out. You're going to be learning how to use this device. It's just steps that we follow. Okay, now something about respond to the home of an elderly female who has fallen and is complaining of right hip pain. She is unable to move, and EMTs on scene suspect a hip fracture. What piece of equipment do you offer to retrieve her from the ambulance, not from, to the ambulance? So what type of equipment do you think you might use? Do you use a KED, backboard, swoop stretcher, the Stokes stretcher, which is also known as the basket stretcher, or the semi-rigid one? So which one do you use? I would use a backboard, because putting a KED not gonna really work. She's lying on her on the floor. The other one is you might I think the rigid board might be the best thing, even though right now there's a lot of controversy, guys, with backboards. I don't know if you associated with EMS systems, but there's they made a study years ago, and Dr. Bledsoe, one of the main guys that actually writes the EMT books, decided that back stretchers are bad. So he's been trying to convince people that back stretchers or backboards are bad. They're more detrimental to the patient. So I remember I saw him in a conference in Florida, and I remember asking, he's like, well, show me the numbers. You can't just say it because it's your personal opinion. Show me the numbers. And he's looking at me like I don't know what the hell I'm talking about here. And I told him, I just responded again. Why is it that you have a negative tendency towards backboards when I find them myself in a lot of situations a lot easier to use for patient to remove the patient from a car than not to than to move him out without that. And I asked him for the numbers, and he said he was gonna email them to me. And of course, that's been like what, 12 years. But now a lot of companies are not carrying the backboards, which is kind of weird because of those statements. And the newer type of medics that are coming out are trained that backboards are bad, which I don't think they are. Patient positioning. A patient with those recovery position, and this is, we went over the recovery position is basically a left or right-sided lateral recumbent. Okay, patient with no suspected spine injuries is placed on the side to help maintain an open airway, and basically we call that a lateral recumbent position. Whether it's right side or left side, it depends on how you know which is easier to move to. Remember that we use the knees to actually put it as a kickstand. So what you do is you lift up the arm above the head, and basically at this point, you grab her from this other side and pull her towards you, and then bring the knee down so you can actually keep her locked in place. Okay. You lift up the leg, and you just roll them towards you. Now, she's not saying, good girl, you did good. No, she's actually checking for breathing. Yeah, I think she might be checking for pulse also, which is a very smart thing. But basically, you let the leg down so you can use it as a kickstand so the patient doesn't roll on her belly. And then if she decides that she wants to vomit or bleed out through the mouth or whatever, it's all draining out instead of going back into the lungs. And that's a finalized position. She's flying like Superman right there. The Fowler's and semi-Fowler's position. The Fowler's position usually is at a 90-degree angle, and the semi-Fowler's is at a 45-degree angle. And I'll show you pictures of both. The stock position, basically you elevate the feet of the supine patient 6 to 12 inches, and you use just the feet, and you use the hips as a angle point, or it's where they're gonna bend. The log roll is the method used to actually move the patient with suspected spine injury from prone position to supine position. As few as 2 rescuers are needed, but 3 is ideal. This is what we call a C-collar. And you've seen these before, you just don't know why. Well, basically, this device secures the C-spine so you don't have any further injury. Because the higher up you do damage to your spinal column, the worse it gets. So anything above this region right here will cut down your respirations. So you're not breathing. Do you know the actor Christopher Reeve? Anybody? Christopher Reeve.
Superman, the original Superman.
Yeah, the original. Well, not the original one, but the one that came out in the 70s. But the original one, I think he got shot or something. But this guy was riding horses as a sport, and the horse knocked him out, and he injured his spine. I believe it like at C5, C6 or something like that. And what happened is that he couldn't breathe, so he had to have a ventilator to breathe for him, and he couldn't move anything below his neck. So now, ideally, at this point, you do notice that she has her hands on each side of the head, because at this point, she is in control of the body, and she does not want the head to move, or the neck to move, or the head. So he gets a backboard as close as possible. He goes to the opposite side, lifts up the patient this way, while she's actually holding the neck still in between her hands, and she's the one that's controlling all the moves. So she's going to turn around and say, okay, we're going to move the patient to her side. 1, 2, 3, move. And then everybody moves. But she's still holding C-spine here. Basically, somebody brings the what do you call it? The backboard closer to the body. And then you roll her back down. Man, look at her eyes. That fear. Okay. So now you log roll her back onto the what do you call it? The backboard at the control of this person here that is controlling the neck. Same thing over here. Okay, you're gonna be moving the patient up and down whatsoever. You lift up the patient and you slide the the backboard under the patient, and then you lay her on top of that. I've never really seen this one done, only because it requires a lot more people. The log roll is a lot easier to use. Okay. Think about it. You respond to a nursing home where an elderly male is actually lying supine in bed and having difficulty breathing. Your partner begins getting oxygen equipment ready. What is your next action? You respond to a nursing home where the elderly male is actually lying supine on the bed and having difficulty breathing. Your partner begins getting oxygen equipment ready. What is your next step or your next action? Which is this one depends on the situation. But what would you do? Well, you make sure that the airway's open. Remember, you have to do primary assessment first. Airway's open, and you have to make sure that there's breathing and circulation. Then you log roll them, or you slide them with a bed sheet, because they're already in a nursing home, and transport them to the stretcher itself and take them to the hospital. Restraints that are restraining the patient, or it's how to tie down the patient. Okay. Securing a combative patient body and extremities to the to prevent injury to himself, herself, or others. You have physical restraints. It's basically you holding the patient with your hands or legs so they cannot move. And you have a mechanical restraint, which you apply a device to patients to restrict movements themselves. You have heart restraints and soft restraints. Heart restraints would be handcuffs, shackles, plastic zip ties, and belly chains, which basically we don't have those. Police department has those. Soft restraints are leather and fabric cuffs, both straps, rolls of gauze, or cravats, which I'll let you know what a cravat is later on. Sheets or clothing basically are used to actually tie the patient down. And we do carry a lot of these, all of these actually, in the ambulance. Now, if you notice right here, they have like a little stringy thing. This is what we call a triangular bandage. It might not look like a triangle, but this is also known as a cravat. And we tie the wrists and then we pull them across so the patient doesn't fly off or want to fly off. Of course, we use the stretcher straps also to hold them in place. I think this is a soft restraining device, which basically you just put it on their wrist and basically just like hold it in place to the stretcher itself. And you have some for the legs also. Patient restraints, secure limbs with appropriate restraints equipment. Do not secure patients face down. That's just bad manners. And you might actually get positional asphyxia, which basically they'll stop breathing. Okay, consider administering supplemental oxygen and check patients' airway, breathing, and circulation at this point to make sure that they're still breathing after you restrain. Anytime that you put a splint, guys, always check for airway, breathing, and circulation, and to make sure that they still have a pulse distal to where you put the restraint at. Now, you might question yourself, well, wait a second. Right here, I just put something around the wrist. Where would you check for a pulse? There's this acronym that we use called, it's called something else now because apparently it was offensive. I remember about 3 years ago, a lot of stuff was offensive and people would start crying about it. But this was called PMS. Okay. And what we do is we stretch out the fingers and we check for pulse. Motor movement. And sensation. So what happens, you stretch out and you basically what you do is you squeeze the fingers. Squeeze the finger, then a fingernail, and let it go. And within 2 seconds, that fingernail should turn from pale to white. Okay, within 2 seconds. Then you ask them to wiggle their fingers. Okay, and you ask them if they can feel this. If they can feel you touching their hands. That's postmortem sensation. Also known as PMS, which has became very controversial a few years ago. But then again, kids will turn around nowadays and believe that they're cats, and you have to acknowledge their beliefs and give them cat food. Okay. Okay, positional asphyxia, okay, check for hours. Clearly document reason for restraining. Like it could be anything, if the patient was combative, patient threatened to leave, or whatsoever. Ensure that group use force required. Minimize injury risks. Prior training on available equipment. Communicate with the plan and act immediately when it comes to dealing with your patient. Now, something to think about. You and your partner are on the scene with 2 police officers. who have responded to the top of a parking garage where a 25-year-old male is claiming to be Superman. He threatens to jump off the garage and refuses to listen to reason. How do you proceed? Would you yell at him and say, try it, let's see if it works? No. So what do? You defuse the situation, make sure that you can actually have a good grab on the patient and bring him back to you try to convince him to come back down any which way, or not have safety equipment that will catch him once he jumps off, and make sure that they hit the landing site. Sometimes they don't. Okay, so let's go over the next chapter. Any questions so far?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, now we're going to be dealing with the next chapter. And this next chapter is not that long, but it just deals with communications. You guys ready for Thanksgiving?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. So are we gonna come on Thanksgiving? Well, on those days, like on Friday?
I'm sorry, what?
Or we're gonna come on Friday?
No. Those 2 days here, you look, your syllabus are free for you guys.
Oh, okay. Just make
I'm not that gacho. But on Christmas Day, you have to be here.
Christmas Day.
I'm just kidding.
Like, pues, como dice mi brother, like in this profession, we don't have days off.
Nope. I'm telling you, I know I lived the life. But then imagine going above that, and you decide that you want to go to medical school or you want to become a nurse. They what? They just get a better pay. There's no rest days.
This course isn't going to be on Christmas.
No. It ends before that.
Yeah, I know.
Porque ya estaban planeando and give me a gift or what? No. Let me see.
A ver quién se vestido de Santa Claus.
A ver, pues sí, a ver qué trae. Que no me traiga los bills. Y así no hay problema. Okay, the principle of effective communication. Now, this is a strange chapter. Remember, your first test is going to be on Monday, and it's going to be from chapter 1 to chapter 6. Okay? You might get 30 questions, you might get 50 questions. I still don't know. I'll send you now. Did everybody have an easy time getting your Google Classroom? I know that I sent the invitations last Wednesday, I think. I know that Lisa, you sent me a change in your email, and I forgot to tell you that if you don't have Google, sometimes it doesn't work. It doesn't allow you to do anything.
Yeah, that's why I did a new account and it worked.
And I'm surprised that you still have Hotmail. Like,
oh, that email since 1998. So
yeah, I know. I had Hotmail. I forgot my username and password for that one. And then I went to Excite, and then I went to Yahoo, and eventually I never went to AOL, but I still get students that are when they're recertifying, they have AOL.
Oh.
Which is like AOL is like
yeah.
But then again, they just kept it. So
yeah.
I mean, I don't blame them. They have to pay for it.
Yeah.
I remember there was something called Netgear also when we were trying to play around with the internet, and Netgear also had an email deal. But eventually it took off, and now I think Gmail is the most popular one. If I think about it. But then if you get your internet connection through AT&T, then you have AT&T as your, what do you call it, as your provider, I mean, your email controller. So remember, test on Monday, then we're going to go over another chapter. I did put a lot of the stuff that I've already sent you by email. I put it on Google Classroom. So you can download it through there. And I think sometimes with Google Classroom, you can answer everything and just send it back directly. Now, if you have problems again, you can always take a picture of it. So, and send it to the email address. And that's how I collect them. So anyway, so principles of effective communication. We're not gonna move the objectives. Okay, what is communication? Okay, the activity of conveying information. Okay, so in order for you to actually convey information, you have to give a person, you have to have a person actually giving the information, and then you have another person actually receiving the information. Excuse me. So individuals with whom you will actually likely to be expected to communicate with will be patients, your partner, EMS personnel, fire personnel, and law enforcement personnel. Now, of course, they don't mention doctors, nurses, or whatsoever, but you still are supposed to be able to communicate with them. Okay. You also have hospital personnel, bystanders, family members, and friends of the patient. Okay. Emergencies are stressful situations for the patient, family members, and bystanders. How you relay the information will leave a big impression on not only of yourself, but your department and profession. Now, I know that we get burned out every now and then, but we still have to be courteous to the patients because, I mean, that's our job. If you feel unhappy doing that job, work somewhere else. But if you're mad at the world, don't work at a fast restaurant because you'll be spitting on the fries. So, no. I like French fries. Okay. How can the way you communicate information during an emergency impact the patient's family members? Well, if you know something to think about. The way you communicate to the patient or the family members. Look, I'm going to give you an example. I remember I was at my parents' house 2 years ago. They actually ended up calling me. I mean, my father came out and told me, I was getting in the truck already ready to leave. And my father comes up to me and says, hey, you need to go to your sister's house because there's a problem with her husband. And her husband's already an older gentleman. He was having a lot of problems. So we drive up there, the ambulance is there. So when we get there, I showed up in one car, my dad shows up in another car, and she's running all over the place.
Mande. El jueves es el cumpleaños de Milo, dice que se...
So basically what happened is that she starts, she's panicking, running all over the place. So I go in back of the ambulance that's already there, knock, and the guys look at me and they give me that face like, nah, man, he's gone. He was already dead. And I turned around and I saw my sister screaming and all frantic. So I closed the doors and I told him, let's work on this guy. Let's work him, even though we know he's already dead. Let's work him. That way, they think that we gave him we gave the guy a fighting chance. And then we worked him all the way to the hospital instead of calling a JP for him to show up and just pronounce him dead. So that's one way. You have to be empathetic to the situation also. So also to bystanders and other responders. What are ways to actually that the EMR can actually help minimize miscommunications? Talk to them correctly. Don't lie to them. Don't tell them everything's going to be okay, even though their head's separated from their body. For the simple reason that they're not going to come out of that one, no matter how much super glue you put on there. Okay, types of communications. You have verbal communications, which are word and sounds that actually make up language that we speak, and nonverbal communication, which is body language, eye contact, and gestures. So, and I've seen this you guys are kind of freaked out with this one. I've actually gone to calls with partners of mine that, you know, they're taking the call and I'm there with them. And they go up to the patients and say, you don't want to go to the hospital, right? And they're doing this movement. And the thing is that, well, you're already telling them that you don't want to take them to the hospital. So they're going to say no. That's a gesture of a nonverbal communication. So, nope, you don't do that. Okay, and then we have written communications, use of letters and words to explain language to speak. And we use this when it comes to report writing and giving our reports to the hospital. The other times we actually use this is if a person cannot speak or cannot hear, we write down stuff for them to actually do it. Now we also have visual, which is signs, symbols, and designs. And then if you've been to the hospital recently, they have charts in there that will tell you what's your pain level at this point, and they have little faces in there showing different gestures and colors. So that's the visual type of communication. Okay. Which type of communication is most important when working with the patients, including children? That's verbal communication. Okay, bystanders, that's also verbal communication, and partners, which is verbal communication. Now, sometimes you don't want to do certain looks, but sometimes you don't want to say certain things, so you give your partner a look, like, hey, you know, we need to go code 3. Instead of telling them that and panicking everybody else, we just look at each other and go, okay, go on, I understand. There's little buttons in the back of the ambulance that you can actually click on that will light up in different colors in the front that will tell you, do we want to go code 1 all the way to code 3? The communication process. Okay. You have the sender. There's one who is actually introducing new thoughts or concepts or initiating communication process. Then you have the message, which is thoughts, concepts, ideas being actually transmitted. And then you have the receiver, which is the one whom the message is actually intended to and is receiving it. So basically, in this figure that you see here, you actually transmit and the person will receive. They will decode it. The idea that formulates in their brain, they encode it and transmit back. Like if you're asking, is you're not going to take your blood pressure, do I have permission to take your blood pressure? All this process goes through. Somebody actually broke this down into steps. Okay, now at this point, they're giving feedback when they say yes. So now the receiver becomes the sender, and you decode it, get the idea, and then code it again, and then turn around and say, okay, which is another message. It's kind of weird for somebody to have that much time to actually break this down. Transmitting is message 55% is in body language, gestures, expressions, postures, and physical manifestations. 38% is voice, which is quality, tone, and inflection. And 7% is words used. So basically, as a pie chart, you break it down into 55% being body language, 38% being tone of your voice, and 7% being verbal communications. Okay. Barriers to communication. You can actually have physical barriers. And give me an example of a physical barrier when we're dealing with communication. Just one example. A wall, a door. You know, that would be a physical barrier. Perceptual, emotional, cultural, language, gender, and interpersonal. Now, when dealing with cultural, since we're getting a lot of migrants coming down over here, it depends on where they're from, but a lot of times, like, you cannot touch somebody, like a woman, if the husband is present, to do your assessment because it's considered unculturally right. So be aware of those situations. Okay. Strategies of effective communications: you speak clearly and use words and terminology the receiver would understand. Actually, in other words, talk to at their level. Keep open mind and resist urge to actually be defensive. Become an active listener and be assertive, especially when safety is at stake. Okay, remain aware of influential body language plays in effective communications, and also accept reality of miscommunications. You know, maybe it's sometimes that you're actually trying to say something, but the person mentally cannot understand. And like, I know I got a call this morning, which is kind of weird, like at 8 o'clock in the morning. And somebody asked me if I was gonna, you know, they were talking to me in Spanish on the phone, right? And I'm not saying anything. You know, that it's time for me to renew my Obamacare. So at this point, I already know this is a call that is not intended for me because I don't have Obamacare. So she's telling me in Spanish, and I told her for, you know, right away I just told her I don't have Obamacare. I have Blue Cross Blue Shield. And she turns around and says, no, speak it in Spanish. And I told her, see, but for whatever reason, the next words that came out of my mouth were in English, and she hung up on me. How rude. So anyway, interpersonal communication is an important form of verbal communications. Occurs most often between 3 or fewer participants in close proximity to each other. And in good interpersonal communications, feedback between sender and receiver is immediate. You have face-to-face communication process also when it comes to therapeutic communications. You have focused. On advancing physical and emotional well-being of the patient, and you have key components is basically trust. And a lot of times when we play around with communicating with a patient, no matter what age, specifically the little ones, you have to gain their trust for them to actually answer you any questions. Okay, you have therapeutic communications. You have 3 component objectives: collecting information, assessing the behavior, and educating the patient. Okay, strategies for successful interviewing: immediately introduce yourself and your level of training. So my name is Robert Gonzalez. I'm an ECA, or I'm an emergency care attendant, or emergency medical responder, depending on where you're from. Obtain a patient's name early, and please, whatever you guys do not call them tios, tias, mama, papa. You know, that's a lot of people find that what do you call it, offensive. Which, I mean, I never seen it, but I've seen it like in the hospitals. So I remember there was one little old lady that the nurse comes up to him, or to her, I'm sorry. And she tells, sí, mamita. Dije, mamita, yo no soy tu esposa. And I was just like, wow, what a comeback. But I think she had been waiting most of her life to tell somebody that. So be very careful when it comes to that. Position yourself at or below the patient's eye level whenever possible, so you can actually be able to communicate with them. If you're above them, then you are in an authoritative type of situation, or you're in control. You don't want that to happen because you want them to give you answers to the questions that you're asking. Like, she is below the level of this guy. And basically, at the same time, she's checking for pulse without him knowing. Okay, so, and also I think she might be checking respirations by putting her hand on her shoulders. But basically, she's keeping herself below the eye level of the patient. So, strategies for successful interviewing: ask one question at a time. Okay, listen carefully to everything the patient tells you. restate the patient's answers when necessary for clarification. So if you don't understand something, did you say you were taking 5 milligrams of this medication? And if she knows that she said it wrong, she'll correct herself, or he. Notice what works with and what does not work with a patient. Interviewing strategies may actually need to be modified depending on the age of the patient also. Again, at the eye level, it's below. The patients are at the same level. And she's, I don't think she's checking for pulse. She might be checking for pulse also. But that human touch calms patients down. Unless they don't want you to touch them. Okay. Cultural considerations demonstrate respect to different cultures and beliefs. Translation services, if you need a translator, get one. I know I took my son recently to go do some shadowing with doctors, but my son speaks very little English. So, I mean, Spanish, I'm sorry. And most of the patients that he was seeing there in Rio Grande just happened to speak Spanish. So he was having a hard time understanding. So patients with disabilities, you can actually have a patient that has hearing loss. They might actually have cognitive disabilities, okay? Or they might actually have service animals. Now, cognitive disabilities, what is that? They're not all there in their heads. So, or they might be more than all there in their heads. So you think about what are the 3 parts of a communication process. Remember when we went over the communication process? Transmit, receive, and I think it was the other one is encode, I think. You know, basically get that idea across. In what ways does the body language impact what you are communicating? Well, if your arms are crossed like this, and you're talking to them, that's already like, I don't want to hear what you have to say. So be very careful of that one too. I know that at one point or another, every medic was using the Blues Brothers sunglasses, and they're very dark. And I remember there was the company that I was doing my write-outs with told me, if I ever catch you wearing those glasses or you're talking to a patient, I'm going to tear them off your face and break them because the patient cannot see you. How does speaking assertively differ from speaking aggressively? Assertively is more of a positive type of thing, and you asserting that you're asking questions and you want the answers to, as opposed to aggressively is a little bit more negative about it. Which strategies improve the interviewing process? Which strategies improve the interviewing process? I went over these. Ask, listen, and restate. Okay, also notice what works with the patient and interviewing the strategies also. Which strategies improve the interviewing process? Well, no, that's what I just went over. Transfer of care. Okay, when we deal with transfer of care, you have physical and verbal handling off of care from one health care provider to another. So in other words, once you get to the hospital, you're going to transport the patient's information that you gathered to the receiving person. You have a continuum of care helps to ensure that the care is consistent and appropriate. Just like when you give medications, you need to make sure that when you give medications, you let the people that you're transferring the care to already give this medication. That way they're not going to get an overdosage of the medication. Patients, remember when it was transfer care, give the patient's name and age, chief complaint was why was the call, brief account of the patient's current condition, and past pertinent medical history. Vital signs, pertinent findings from physical exam, overview of care provided, and patient's response to their care or to that care. Or I gave them oxygen and their O2 sats went up. That would be a positive thing. But if their O2 sats don't go up or they go back down, then you have to worry about saying, wait a second, what I was doing is not helping them. Something to think about. What are the key elements of verbal report? Well, maybe we just went over this. And basically is give the patient's information, like patient's name and age, chief complaint, brief, account of what the patient's current condition is, past pertinent medical history, vital signs, pertinent findings, overview of care, and patient's response to the care. What is it? Why is it important to provide a concise verbal report upon transfer of care? Well, because the information needs to be transferred to the next patient so you don't repeat stuff. Or letting them know that you've already done it and they're trying to see if it's working. Do not take it personally if the ambulance crew does not have time for a complete report. How you doing, Daisy? And my dog just went and came into my daughter's dog just came to visit me in my office. What's up? Can y'all see her? It's okay. If she left, I guess she did find out I don't have any food here. Okay, radio communications. I like dogs. I don't like cats. I think cats are evil. Okay, radio communications, you have the radio system, a combination of transmitters and receivers, repeaters, and antenna or antennae. Basically, all it is that you use a device that transmits and receives. If you have a device that does both, then it's called a transceiver. The repeaters are towers that will repeat your signal to somewhere else. And dispatch centers utilize base station radios that actually transmit over a wide area. And you have EMS personnel that carry pagers and handle portable radios also. What's up, Chu? This is my dog. So you have this guy has a transceiver right there communicating with somebody through possibly they can use it. Some fire trucks and some ambulances do have what do you call it? Repeater capabilities. Pagers notify response personnel of emergency calls. Portable radios communicate directly with the dispatch center, and you have radios require specific protocols. Protocol when actually communicating with others in the system. So why are portable radios an important piece of communication equipment? Well, they're important because the information that we're trying to receive or transmit is given to us and it's portable. In other words, we can actually walk out of the ambulance without having to think that the message might have come in if we don't have a portable radio. How does the use of a proper radio technique help actually ensure effective communication? And the techniques are basically, you press the button, wait a couple of seconds, and then talk instead of start talking and then pressing the button. And you can actually be like a certain amount of distance from the radio. If not, spit's going to be coming out of the speaker or the other radio, and a whole bunch of other ones. Questions? Okay, don't forget, we have a test on Monday from chapter 1 to chapter 6. 30 questions to 60 questions. Okay, I think I'm not going to go over a new chapter because I think we're already ahead. I know we still have a lot of time. Okay, I'll give you an option. Do you guys want to go since it's Friday, or do you want me to continue?
I don't mind if you continue. Like to do a brief summary of everything.
6 chapters.
Like I didn't came on Monday, so I wouldn't mind that.
Okay, anybody else? Norma?
Yeah, that's fine. I missed half of the session on Monday anyway, so. if
Okay,
that's
well,
fine
I
with
agree,
you.
sir. I agree.
Okay, so let's go over the stuff that we went on Monday. Let me just look real quickly. Give me a few minutes. Let me see. Okay, this is chapter 1. Let me see. Okay, chapter 1. I think we covered 2 chapters on Monday, I believe, or not 3 chapters. I can't remember. I don't know. It might have been 1, 2, and 3. So basically, chapter 1, basically introducing the EMS system. We talked about how it all started. And we're not gonna go with this. How everything in the system started. Well, actually, I can go all the way down to the very end and do a summary. Yeah, it's a lot easier. So basically, there's 4 levels of EMS education and training. There's the first level, which is emergency medical responders, also known as ECA in Texas. Emergency medical technician, which is the EMT basic. Advanced EMT, or also known as the AEMT, and the paramedic. Now, some people like to believe that there's a different level of paramedic, which is certified paramedics and licensed paramedics. And ideally, basically, it's the same thing. It's just, the background of education that you have is what's different. But those are the 4 different levels of EMS personnel. Now, I'm going to guarantee you it's probably going to be a couple of questions on that. Okay, EMS personnel dispatched to the scene, to the emergency when actually dispatcher receives the emergency call. So basically, a dispatcher receives it, then the EMS personnel is actually sent off to the call. And remember, we have 2 different factions. We have the golden hour. I don't know if you guys remember the golden. I've talked about the golden hour a couple of times. And basically, the golden hour states from the time the person got into the accident to all the time that they get into the operating room. Okay. Now, so they might actually be from the time they got to an accident, EMS shows up, they have a platinum 10 minutes. Okay, and then they transport the patient to the hospital. They get to the hospital, they get evaluated in the emergency room. They do all these tests, and eventually they decide this guy needs to do surgery. So basically he goes to the operating room. That's basically the golden hour. Not all situations are the same. Now, within the golden hour, we have what we call a platinum 10 minutes. And the platinum 10 minutes dictate that from the time that you get to the scene of the accident, you have 10 minutes to make that transport decision and take off. Anytime that the golden hour is messed with, let's say the guy is trapped inside the car and it takes an hour and a half. Okay. The chances of survival for that patient start going down. Same thing with platinum 10 minutes. The longer you wait, chances of the person's survivability go down. Okay, emergency care technicians, emergency medical responders. Oh, I think we went over that. So I think I might have skipped. It went back somehow. So give me a few seconds. Okay, EMS personnel, dispatch to the scene of emergency when actually dispatch to the emergency call. Every EMS system requires to designate medical director, and the medical director himself The medical director is the one that's in charge, or you're basically, well, he's in charge, but you are working under his license. Very simple. So the medical director, when you think about it, is the one that you're working under his license. So you need to follow what he tells you that you can do and what you can't do. Emergency medical responder primary responsibility is personal safety. Remember, I've told you several times already, your personal safety comes before anybody else's. So it's your personal safety, your partner's personal safety, then the patient's safety, and then your bystanders. And your partner has the same thing, but he's looking for his personal safety, and then he's looking for your personal safety. So both of you are double covered, while the patient is just single covered by the medic. Okay. Main duties of the EMR is scene safety. Make sure that it's safe for you to go there. If you get to a crime scene, guess what permission you need to have in order to get into the crime scene? Police department. If you go a fire, or a car accident, guess who permission you need to have in order to get into the scene? Fire department.
For a car accident, also the fire department?
Most of the time, I mean, I'm sorry, but fire department has to be in every single car accident. Because they're the ones, because you never know. I know that when I was working EMS, I always, whenever I would smell gasoline, I would tell the fire department, hey, charge up a line, in other words, have a line connected to a water source and hose me down if you see the car turning on fire. Because, I mean, you never know. It might be safe, it becomes safe for you to go in there, but all of a sudden, boom, things change. And when it comes to scene safety, the scene dynamics are very easily changed when you're in a non-controlled environment. If it's controlled, like in the hospital room or whatsoever, then that's fine. It's gonna stay the same. But we're dealing with being outside, with cars that are wrecked that might turn on fire, or you might actually have the airbag deploy when you're trying to deal with a patient, or you might actually have a radiator hose blow up and burn you up. So there's a lot of things that can actually go wrong. I know that even going out in rainy weather where it's cold, you might actually slip on ice. The other one is that's scene safety. Gaining access to the patient and assessing patients by providing emergency care to the patient. In other words, you do your primary survey, you do a secondary survey, and then you provide care for them. Now, in the primary survey, you can interfere. In between each one, you have airway, breathing, and circulation. If the airway is closed, you can interfere and open it up. If the circulation, if the breathing is not adequate, you can interfere and give them oxygen or give them positive pressure ventilation. And if there's no circulation, guess what you do? You give circulation to them by doing CPR. EMR's main duties: moving the patient, transferring care from one highly trained person to another, and protecting patients' privacy and many cultural differences. Remember, we do fall under HIPAA, and HIPAA negates for us to deal or to talk about anything about the patient to anybody else that is not involved with the healthcare. Okay, and being patient's advocate also by providing privacy and helping the patient keep their modesty and whatsoever. Because there's a line that I've used, and I don't think I've used it yet here, but I actually had a t-shirt that said, if you get into an accident, I'm gonna get to see you naked. Only because a trauma patient automatically becomes a naked patient. And only because if you can't see the injuries, you cannot treat the injuries. Do you get that? I mean, having a shirt like that offended a lot of people. But then again, I don't give a shit. So, but basically, all I'm trying to tell them is, a trauma patient is a naked patient, and one of my students had given it to me for as a gift. Okay, emergency medical responders have the duty to maintain skills. Oh, hold on. I'm in class. Emergency medical responders have the duty to maintain skills. And with all the skills that you learn, you maintain them and you keep on practicing them. One of the first things that people forget how to use is the KED, which is the device we just talked about, the traction splint, and sometimes on how to transport a patient. Keep up to date with latest trends and research, because things change, and maintain a professional demeanor at all times. In other words, act professional. Okay. Emergency medical responders, important part in the quality of system, may actually participate in specific duties related to quality control process, and have a duty to stay informed about latest research findings. So let's go over some review questions. Describe the various EMS models. What do you think that the most common EMS models are? Well, we have fire department based EMS. We have what do you call it? Privately owned, hospital based, municipalities where it's controlled by a city, and whatsoever. Differentiate the 4 levels of EMS personnel providers. If you have the EMR, EMT basic, AEMT, and the paramedic. Now the EMR has the basic level skills, but a paramedic needs to know all those basic level skills. Normally, as a paramedic, you practice your basic level skills before you get to the advanced level skills. The EMT basic can give a couple of more medications and do a couple of more skills. AEMT can start IVs and intubate patients and give more medications. And the paramedic level can actually give cardiac medications, monitor with defibrillator. And of course, EMT basic or EMR can also use the defibrillator, but in the sources of the automated or the AED, automated external defibrillator. I differentiate the various attributes of EMS systems and describe the function of each. And the EMS systems that we talked about were the EMRs and everything else. Explain how state, region, and specific statutes and regulations affect how an emergency medical responder might actually function. So everything, remember I told you, that was controlled by the Department of State Health Services. Yeah, Department of State Health Services, also known as DSHS. And this one, in this level, they have regulations that come from the Department of Transportation that allows us to do certain things in the basic level, EMR level, advanced level, and paramedic level. And these things, like a basic is not expected to do what a paramedic does, but a paramedic does has to know what an EMR does and actually be able to do it. And a lot of times, depending on the county that you're in or the city that you're in, they might allow you to do something else. I know that, one of the protocols that I really dealt with is, since I worked in the Stark County area, if there was a burn patient, we would put a blanket on them that was wet so they can keep them cool. But if it's going to take more than 10 minutes to transfer the patient to the hospital, then we wouldn't do that because the patient will become hypothermic. So working like in McAllen as opposed to working at the county hospital, those two regulations actually were different. Describe the characteristics of a professionalism as they actually relate to the EMS provider. So you have to act professional, you have to be dressed nicely groomed, and whatsoever, so you can actually play the part of professionalism. Now, we went over some of the stuff when we're dealing with communications, but when we dealt with the characteristics of professionalism, how they relate to EMS provider, you have to show that you're professional. Explain the role of emergency medical responder with regards to continuous quality improvement. So explaining the role of an emergency medical responder, EMR, with regards to continuous quality improvement, key things about that is that you need to know the new trends that are coming out. And if, let's see, if a certain medication is given on this type of situation, but because there's a shortage, then you can give maybe this other medication. So you need to keep up with all this information. Guys, you're going to get into a field that education is never going to stop. You have to keep up. Explain the role of public health systems and the relationship to EMS, disease surveillance, and injury prevention. So when we're talking about the public health systems, we're talking about hospitals, and depending, there's a new level of paramedic that's also coming out. And it started years ago, which we talk about, which is the long-term paramedic, or also known as the rural health paramedic, where instead of doing 911 calls, you go do house visits and check up on patients. Almost like in the sense of having a home health agency with paramedics. Okay. Of course, remember that hospitals are differentiated into 4 different levels also. Trauma level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. Trauma level 1 has everything. Like doctors on call or doctors there. Trauma level 2 might not have the specialists, but they have everything else. And the further you go, the lesser the trauma system gets. I don't remember what Rio Grande set up as what trauma level they're at. Yeah. Explain the role of disaster medical assistance teams play and how they actually integrate with EMS systems. And if you go look at the videos, we talked about how you might actually be recruited or go work with some of these companies that require for you to be an EMR and national registry, so you can go work out of the States, like when Katrina hit, or when the Houston, remember a few years ago, there was a big humongous hurricane coming towards Houston, and everybody at the same time decided that they wanted to leave Houston. Well, the lines were hours long. They still couldn't get out of town, and people were running out of gas. I think there was even a bus that actually turned themselves on fire and burned a lot of the people that were in the bus. So the DMAT is if we work for these people, we respond to these type of situations. Explain the role of research plays in EMS and the ways that the emergency medical responders might actually identify and support the research. Now, the research that we do could be anything as simple as when something going through a school zone at this time from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock might be impossible. So we need to find a different route at this time. Or it can be all the way to where like something in this medication is not working, or knowing that during the winter we have a lot more asthma attacks than we do during the summer. So things like that, doing research like that helps us get better prepared. We'll go to the next chapter. Okay, so this next chapter, chapter 2, was based on the legal issues. Let me just show you. Okay, so these legal issues, basically, can y'all see this?
Yes, sir.
So explain the concepts of duty to act, breach of duty, and ethics. When we're talking about this duty to act, breach of duty, and ethics, we can go back to all the way to the beginning. So basically, let's see. We have the Good Samaritan law, which basically minimizes the exposure to liability. It makes us people not want to sue us as much. Sometimes, you know, and I'm gonna tell you, a secret that I've told very few people. When I worked in EMS and I was actually going to work, I was not clocked in. So if I was, you know, and there was a joke that there was actually passed out like a meme. And basically this is how can you tell a paramedic at the scene of the accident? And basically a paramedic going to work at the scene of the accident is the one that's actually doing this and covering the accident with his hand so he doesn't have to stop at the accident. So because I don't have the equipment to take care of the patient whatsoever. So if I show up, I tell them I'm a paramedic, they expect me to have all the drugs and everything, but I'm in my private car. I'm not on duty. So all I can do is CPR and transport, you know, and wait for transport to show up. So basically, the Good Samaritan law protected me in that level. Encouraged passerbys to provide emergency care also. And this one, basically what it did is it caused the, by law, you have to stop whether you're certified or not at the scene of an accident. Remember, there's not going to be any compensation for you to help, and remain within specific standards of care. Now, the duty to act is a moral, it's one of the questions, moral and legal obligations to provide care. The standard of care is based on the level of training, common practice, and current research that you have. Okay, it varies from county to county and state to state and region to region. It's expected to follow approved standing orders, protocols for your EMS system, and the protocols are governed by your medical director. The scope of practice is what is legally permitted to be done by individuals. So if you're a paramedic, you're expected to do certain things at your level because you've gotten trained. Okay, this does not define what must be done for a given patient or a particular situation. It's based on EMS education and standards also, which are all basically now same. What a paramedic learns in New York is the same thing that paramedic learns here in the Valley. Ethics, the moral principles that actually guide behavioral or behavior as right and good and proper. Ethical responsibilities, patient needs to actually needs before responder own, so long as it's safe to do so. So the patient needs before the responder's own cannot be provided unless it's safe for you to do so. So your own personal safety is more important. Patient receives appropriate medical care and maintain an open mind. Now I'm going to tell you something. You might, with this first one, patients needs before responders own, so long as it is safe to do so, you might think, well, the paramedics are being selfish. But if you think about it, you have ambulance one shows up, guy jumps in and gets trapped underwater and it drowns. So guess what? Now they're going to have to call 2 more ambulances because you need one ambulance for the guy that just drowned, the medic that just drowned, and then the other one for the patient that the first medic was supposed to take care of. So there you go. Okay, ethical responsibilities, develop understanding and differences, treat all people equally, provide the highest standard of care, maintain and practice skills and knowledge, and attend continuing education to actually maintain everything. Ethical responsibilities, be honest and reporting care provided, and errors should be reported immediately. And values are core beliefs you hold to be true, like integrity, compassion, accountability, respect, and empathy. So let's go. And they should have answered most of the questions in. Oh, wait a second. Most of these, right? Yeah, we talked about those. Let me see if I can. Okay, what is the difference between scope of practice and standard of care? What is what you're allowed to do and what you're supposed to do? How does the EMR, the Good Samaritan law in your area relate to the EMR? They say, well, again, if you're working and you're actually dispatched to that call and you're in an ambulance, you're expected to do everything as an EMR. But if for whatever reason you're in your private car, that's why I don't encourage people that have just gotten certified to get big stars of life in their cars saying I'm an EMR, because then you're going to be held accountable. Ley incognito. What's the difference between civil and criminal litigation? We'll go over those in just a little bit. What are the differences, types of different type of consent? Then we're talking about consent. We're talking about the different types of consent, which is implied consent. We'll go over those also. Went the wrong way. Consent is a legal term that is actually given formal permission for you to do something. But in order to get permission, you need to explain to the patient what you're going to be doing. So that's consent itself. Now we have different types of consent, and we'll go over these. You have express consent or informed consent. It's a component where adults' information decision to accept emergency care provided by the EMR is informed consent. By law, only a parent or guardian can actually give consent to a minor unless they're emancipated. Expressed and informed consent, advise patient of what you're going to be doing, what you think care must actually be necessary, what care you plan to provide, and any consequences related to refusing care. And I know that I've heard medics like, you don't want to go to the hospital, te vas a morir. Which is, actually, he's not wrong because everybody dies, but it's just how soon you want to die. You have implied consent. Legal position assumes that the unresponsive or incompetent patient wants you to take care of them. So basically all it is if you're unconscious, well, he never told me if I can do this to him. They go, well, you have to follow implied consent. You're unconscious or a minor or intoxicated, you have to assume that they want to be taken care of. And then we're talking about emancipated minors, basically it's a kid that's actually married, pregnant, is a parent, or a member of an armed forces, or financially independent, living away from home. You can actually refuse care. You have the alert of competent adults have the right to actually refuse care, but they have to fall within those 4 spheres, those 4 cognitive spheres, which one of them is they need to know who they are. They need to know what happened to them. They need to know the time of day, and they need to, which is the other one? Time and place, where they're at. Then we talk about the advanced directives. There was another, no, I think that was asked. Hold on, let me just see. This isn't really reportable. Can't remember what the other one was. Oh, criminal, civil and criminal. Criminal can actually take you to jail. Civil, they're actually going after your license and your money. explain the role of the EMR with regards to refusal of care. Well, you can receive a refusal of care as long as you inform them that this is what's wrong with them, and you assess them, and then they need to know that these are the consequences. Advanced directives are like your DNR forms or your right to live forms. Patient confidentiality is that you cannot give any information out unless the patient, well, not even if the patient tells you to give it out. I know that one of my very famous lines, whenever I was at a crime scene or an accident scene, reporters will come up to me and say, "Hey, what happened?" Well, at this point, I can't give you this information. You need to talk to my supervisor. I'm here to take care of the patient. And then, of course, mandated reporting, which is basically, and I mentioned dog bites as one of them, crimes, abuse, elderly or child abuse, or whatsoever. Crime scene preservations, like you do not want to become part of the scene itself, so you need to be very careful on where you step and whatsoever, and don't touch anything unless it's dealing with a patient. And I know that one of them is like, you see a bullet wound on the patient, when you're cutting their clothes off so you can actually try to take care of the patient, do not cut through the hole. For the simple reason that that's evidence right there. It can tell the police department what type of caliber weapon they actually used. Okay, now chapter 3. Okay, when it comes to chapter 3 is the wellness of the EMS personnel. In this chapter, basically talked, the EMR should actually establish, now when it comes to summary of the whole chapter, the EMR should actually establish a baseline health status prior to actually beginning work. So they need to do an assessment on you before you start work. And I was really freaked out with this type of situation where I knew a guy just had open heart surgery. And they just told me, oh, he's working the trucks again. Dude, it's only been about a month. I want to release them. But then again, depends on who you work with. Standard precautions include maintaining philosophy that all patients are potentially infectious. Okay, so you never know where the patient has been. The patient doesn't know where you've been. So always take standard precautions. Wear gloves, goggles, and a mask if possible. Nowadays, a mask is a mandate. Okay, taking necessary precautions to minimize risks of becoming exposed to diseases causing pathogens. Then again, you're talking about wearing a mask, wearing gloves, washing your hands, wearing goggles. Proper BFSI precautions should be taken with all patients, and BSI precautions, which is body substance isolation, is wearing personal protective equipment such as gloves, eye protection, and protective gowns. 4 ways that pathogens enter the body. Injection, where you can actually get injected with it through a bite bug or some other source. You absorb it, you breathe it in or inhale it, or you eat it. So there are 4 different ways that you can actually get body infections or pathogens. Pathogens is basically a word for infectious substances or diseases or bugs. Okay, know your company's procedure if you suffer exposure to patients' blood or body fluids. And a lot of times what they do is once you report it, they'll send you to the hospital. and you get a set of labs to dictate, something. These were my results at this point. So what happens in 6 months, they'll test you again, and they're going to see if there's any changes. Immediately wash area with warm soap and water and contact supervisor, and always keep personal safety your top priority and use appropriately trained resources. Emergency medical responders must actually be aware of causes of stress and ways to that stress may actually exhibit itself. So you need to know on what causes stress and how you can prevent it from getting that stress. Stress can actually be caused by negative changes in the behavior and attitude, as well as physical changes. Develop coping mechanisms for common stressors of the job, like eating a healthy and balanced diet, getting regular exercise, maintain a balanced work life. So basically, don't try to get those 120 hours a week, because you're gonna get burned out, and your system's gonna react to it. System is can be helpful when trying to manage effects of actually stress following a critical incident. And basically, like if you get to a call where there's 20 patients, you get overwhelmed. If you get to a call where there's a kid, you might get overwhelmed. So you want to go ahead and follow these guidelines so they can actually, not all companies have a system of procedure. So somebody you can talk to, but the hospital can probably provide you with one. It's like nowadays, if there's a school incident, like a school shooting or whatever, for the next week, they're going to have all these counselors coming in and talking to all the kids. That's what CISM is, to make sure that they don't get affected by it. Review questions. Why is it important to have a baseline health assessment? To make sure that you're qualified to work. Well, not qualified, you're okay to work. What immunizations are recommended for healthcare providers? Well, we have the ones that we normally get every year, which is your flu. Nowadays is your COVID. In certain cases, which your HPV, and things along with even meningitis. Then, of course, you have to have all your childhood ones, all the childhood ones that you received throughout your whole life. You have to understand, there are people out there that have never received it, and they're carriers, and they come over and infect you. So, what immunizations are recommended for healthcare providers? Well, we just went over that one. What are the 4 routes by which pathogens enter the body? Well, we just talked about it. They're going to have an inhalation, which you're going to breathe it in. You're going to get it injected. You're going to get it ingested, or you can absorb it through your skin. Okay. What are the body substance isolations, precautions, and where? Oh, hold on. And when should they be used? Whenever you're dealing with the patients, at all times. And they are your gloves, gowns, goggles, and whatsoever. Okay. What are some personal protective equipment items and the purpose of each? Well, I didn't mention the masks yet, but yeah, nowadays every EMS personnel has to carry an N95 mask, only because of COVID. What is or anything else, like even the flu? What is the difference between cleaning and disinfecting? Cleaning is cleaning with just like soap and water. Disinfecting is actually using chemicals to actually kill off the bugs. What procedures should the EMR follow after a possible pathogen exposure? And these are the steps that you have to actually take. And basically, if you get exposed to a pathogen again, it's some type of viral or bacteria or fungus or whatsoever, you have to, depending on the company you work for, They're gonna send you to the hospital. You're gonna get a set of vital signs. But before you do that, you have to wash the area because you might not get an accidental needle stick. Wash the area with warm water and soap, and then put some disinfectant on it. Once you get to the hospital, they're gonna draw your blood, and they're gonna do a baseline set of vital signs, and they're gonna ask you to come back. Depends on the hospital, depends on the protocol. It could be up to 6 months. It could be as little as 1 month or 1 week, so they can see if there's any changes in your chemistry. What steps should the EMR take to mitigate common scene hazards? Well, you have to make sure that you know what the scene hazard is. If you see a down wire, then you call the electric company to come shut it off. If you smell gas, then you call the gas company. If you see a fire, call the fire department. Oh, sorry, I went to number 2. What are several sources of stress common encountered by the EMR? Well, the types of calls that you're going to be getting, the amount of work that you're going to be doing. The other one would be stressors that are in the field, like dealing with kids or more than one person or people yelling at you. Remember, we work in a thankless job. What are some common physical, emotional, and physiological responses to stress? Well, you might actually become introverted. In other words, you don't want to talk to anybody. You might not, you might want to spend more time by yourself. There's a whole bunch of them. Even your sexual drive can actually go down. So there's a whole bunch of them that you can look at. What are some strategies that can actually be used to assist oneself and others in coping with death and dying? So what are some strategies that you can actually use to assist oneself and others in coping with death and dying? Like, guys, you're going to be working in a field that deals with death. How we actually react to it and how we see it. I know that some of the coping mechanisms that we have is actually going to system and find out, talk to somebody that professional that can actually walk us through it. The other one, remember that there's 5 stages to death and dying, and we have to deal with all those stages, even though we might not be personally connected to the person that has actually died. So the other one would be actually talking to people. Then of course you can follow the rest of the guidelines, where you start eating correctly, start exercising, don't work more than you should, and whatsoever. Okay. Any questions?
No, sir.
Okay, so at this point, remember, we'll meet on Monday at same time, same bat channel. You guys are taking for that. So I'll see you on Monday then.